So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the events overnight in the Middle East, where Iran launched 300 drones and missiles at Israel, 99% of which were intercepted, some of them by RAF jets, which were scrambled to the area on Rishi Sunak's orders. Now, Lizzie, this is going to dominate the agenda today. The Prime Minister is expected to make a statement to the Commons later this afternoon, I think. Without going through millennia of war in this area, what exactly has happened here over the weekend?
Yeah, so obviously there's a long backstory here, but essentially Iran launched an aerial attack on Israel in the sort of late Saturday, early hours of Sunday morning. There was more than sort of 300 missiles, drones sent towards Israel, which has a famous missile defense system called the Iron Dome. So they sort of pride themselves on being able to repel assaults from this sort of assault. 99% of the sort of missiles and drones were shot down. I believe there was some shrapnel got through and a child was injured, but the majority of the Iranian attack was thwarted by not only Israel, but also the US and the UK. So the Prime Minister yesterday did a short clip from Downing Street where he confirmed that RAF jets had been involved and had shot down a number of drones. So it was obviously quite a dramatic situation. I think the Prime Minister was briefed first on Friday. They had a Cobra meeting. And so, now all eyes are sort of on Israel on what they're going to do next. I think Israel's war cabinet met yesterday for a number of hours, didn't seem to agree a strategy. And global leaders, the US, the UK, the rest of the G7, all desperately trying to cool the temperature. They're seriously worried that this could sort of spiral into something that totally cannot be controlled in the Middle East, which obviously would affect the whole world.
So what do you think, everybody? Is this something that has caused you some concern? It does seem like it's a long way away and it doesn't, what's the problem? There's always been rows and rockets firing around in this part of the world. A lot of people, you could be forgiven for thinking that, I suppose. That's kind of the way the news has gone. But, Iran signalled it was going to do this for quite some time, didn't it? So Israel had time to be prepared. Its allies had time to be prepared. And Iran's been at war with Israel pretty much since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, when the pro-Western Shah was overthrown, the mullahs took over. It's not the first time these two have faced off. Morning, Susan. So what's different now? What's the different aspect to all this? Because this, I think, is one of the first times they've been so obviously Iran v Israel, as opposed to using their proxies, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So quite a lot of the time, the fighting is they're fighting a sort of shadow war almost. So Iran's got proxies in, Lebanon, in Syria, there's Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've also supported the Houthis in Yemen. So quite often what you see is there are these sort of strikes between Iran's proxy groups and Israel. But this is the first time, I think, since in decades, certainly, that Iran has launched an attack itself onto Israeli soil. And I think that is quite significant. And then also, obviously, the wider conflict, the wider context of the war the war against Hamas. So Western nations, the US, the UK, all obviously very involved in kind of supporting Israel against Hamas, but also have become in sort of recent months like increasingly concerned about the sort of death toll amongst civilians, whether Israel has gone too far, whether it is behaving in, whether it's committing acts that are beyond sort of international law in Gaza. So I think that is an important context here as well, because, some people theorize that what Iran has done is sort of to try and draw Israel, is to sort of try and provoke a war, basically, and to keep the US involved, because they've been sort of pulling back a bit.
Exactly. It has kind of pulled the allies back in, isn't it? So, like you say, after October the 7th, when there was a lot of sympathy for Israel and the horrific massacres that happened there, there's then been this war in Gaza, which has been brutal. And it has been something which Israel's big allies in the West have repeatedly said, okay, you need to calm it down now. You've done some stuff, but no, you've had your retaliation, but you need to just step back, just calm it down. You need an exit strategy, you need your way out. Sherilyn's saying here, it's a matter of time. Why can't us English keep out of other people's business? Palestine and Israel is very much our business, I'm afraid, Sherilyn, going back to the Crusades, kind of our fault in lots of ways. But she does say as well that people are going to be fighting over there. It's just a matter of time. But so we've had this sort of situation where the allies have said, please just calm down. Please stop having such a brutal prosecution of your war. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, has pretty much ignored that, I think it's fair to say, and said, well, we're just going to do what we're going to do, whatever. And now, because Iran's done this, Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden have ordered their troops to go and defend Israel, pretty much. I mean, Sunak is obviously got some problems at home, and will have no harm whatsoever in looking a bit tough and like he's ordering the planes to go off and do something successful. And the question everyone's going to want him to answer this afternoon, if he stands up in the House of Commons, is the parameters of the UK's involvement in this conflict. You know, at what point do we go in? At what point do we pull out? How far are you going to go? Because no one wants to go to war here. It's not our business, kind of, as Sherilyn says. And the Mirror Politics newsletter, which everyone should subscribe to, points out this morning that it's a really sticky wicket when Netanyahu has ignored our requests to calm down, and suddenly we're having to rush in and participate in his war because the alternative is letting Iran, who are run by a bunch of lunatics, just kind of bomb whoever they want. Politically, it's really difficult, isn't it?
It's a diplomatic nightmare, I think. I mean, there are many reasons why I wouldn't want to be foreign secretary, but I think certainly at the moment, it's really hard for the UK and for, you know, other allies of Israel who, especially since the bombing of the murder of aid workers in Gaza recently by Israel, so the killing by in a drone strike, that has kind of really cause people to cool off and to actually say, you know, Israel's conduct is really unacceptable. The language you saw out of Downing Street, out the Foreign Office around that was really quite strong. But now they equally they still want to support Israel, but they don't want to be drawn into a battle with Iran, but they don't want Iran to be attacking Israel. It's an extremely complicated situation. And if Israel does retaliate, goodness knows what could happen. You know, the Prime Minister said yesterday that the impact is impossible to overstate on the stability of the region and the wider world. David Cameron was on the radio this morning and he was saying that the UK doesn't support Israel in a retaliatory strike against Iran. But when asked whether, you know, what happens if Iran attacks Israel again, he said, well, you know, that's a different question. So I suppose this is where MPs are going to be wanting to try and dig in this afternoon about, you know, what are the limits of our support for Israel and how far could we go? What kind of conversations are being had? Is it likely that Israel will retaliate? And yeah, so it's a fast-moving situation, a lot of different players, and it becomes, there's also obviously the wider conflict as well between Russia and Ukraine. So you had Russia coming out yesterday urging restraint for Israel to show restraint against Iran, despite the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. So, you know, there's a lot of players here.
Vladimir Putin urging people to be restrained militarily. Yeah. Pot, kettle, what colour are you? Paul says, I don't believe Iran wants to escalate the conflict further, but at the same time they would if Israel retaliates against their drone strike. Last night, or this weekend rather, worked out quite well for Iran because, like you say, they want Israel obliterated. They want America to stay involved in that region, and they want to be able to, you know, square off against the great Satan, and it suits them politically at home as well. They've got their own problems. And so by having this drone strike, they've got America and the UK back alongside with Israel. They haven't slaughtered huge numbers of people, so they don't look too bad, although there was a little 7-year-old Bedouin girl who got hit by shrapnel. And they won't really mind too much that I think that their missiles didn't all get home, because the point of the strike wasn't to cause damage and death. The point was to get America back on side and, you know, change the political calculation a bit in the area. And that's what's happened. Mike says, times like these show how irresponsible it was for Sunak to appoint a foreign secretary who cannot be questioned in the Commons. He's got a point there, hasn't he, Lizzie? David Cameron's just really been questioned on LBC.
Yeah, that's right. I think, you know, MPs have been, the fact that because David Cameron is a peer, he can't, and not an MP, he can't give a statement in the House of Commons, which is a major problem. He obviously faces questions in the House of Lords, which is, you know, is not a small thing. There are a lot of peers who are very experienced, who have a lot of knowledge, but they are not the elected representatives that the public has put into Parliament. And so it is not really adequate. And MPs have been trying for a while to try and come up with some sort of solution. Interestingly, on Friday, number 10, a minister stepped down. So number 10 did a tiny reshuffle, and they've named Andrew Mitchell as the Deputy Foreign Secretary, which is very unusual. So he is obviously going to deputise for Cameron in the Commons, but I suspect today it will be the Prime Minister, because considering the severity of it, Rishi Sunak will probably want to do this statement himself. But yeah, there are definitely broader questions about David Cameron's accountability in Parliament, particularly because, you know, there are always global issues, but it certainly feels at the moment like there is a lot of very high stakes stuff going on.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak's not a political genius, is he? He hasn't got the strategic brain to think his way sort of around a corkscrew. So what's all what you need in this situation? So it's all going to be a bit sticky. We'll have to sort of see how it pans out. Susan says she's worried about when it's going to appear at our door. It will do. And despite what Sherilyn says, what happens globally does affect us here in the UK. Jay Sutcliffe says it's not our fault. Historical events probably hark back to the Crusades, not our business when they've had 1,000 years to get to grips with this farce. Yeah, but Palestinian situation is pretty much, that was us, to speak to Lawrence of Arabia within living memory. Sherilyn says, sooner Richie's gone, the better. Richie?
I mean, maybe she, you know,
Rishi. Rishi's gone, the better. Sorry, Sherilyn. Sorry, I was thinking Lionel. It's a Monday morning. It's been difficult.